Good afternoon. I'm Dan DeRose with 19, coming to you from our digital desk again. We want to have a conversation about the tariffs announced by President Donald Trump yesterday from the Rose Garden at the White House. An interesting set of tariffs. Bottom line, Trump is going to charge any country that wants to ship anything in the United States a flat rate 10% tariff. Now, there are higher tariffs on other countries, and these are what he is calling reciprocal tariffs. There are a handful of countries that the president says for too many years have been charging the United States these tariffs. Our goods, we're shipping grain, rice, products, cars, whatever you want to ship from the United States into these other countries, and they smack a tariff on it before it even gets into their countries. He named a few of these countries. You may have seen him yesterday holding up that big board in the Rose Garden. You look at China, who charges the United States 67% tariff on anything we send into that country. So now Trump wants to charge them 34%. He's not going the full way. They charge us 67%. He's going to do 34%. When you look at the European Union, the European Economic Union, they're not going to be happy. They apparently charge the United States 39% on anything we send, and now we're going to charge them 20% on anything they send. Look at Vietnam. They are at 90%. Trump said we send them rice into that country, and they charge us 90% tariff or tax on that. So Trump is now going to charge them 46% on anything they send into our country. You might ask, what does Vietnam send to our country? There's a lot of textiles, a lot of clothes. In fact, as I was getting dressed this morning, I checked this jacket, and yes, this jacket is from or was made in Vietnam. So those are the kinds of things that we have to ask: is what will the impact be on the average Clevelander, the average Northeast Ohio resident? What are we going to see, if anything, over the next few months? To continue this conversation, we're going to bring in Professor John Ernest. He is with Case Western Reserve University. He's with the Department of Economics and the Weatherhead School of Management. Professor, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. Doing well.
Hey, interesting conversation here. It seems since day one that President Trump has taken office, the word tariff has become just a regular piece of vocabulary. How big, in the grand scheme of things, and we'll get into the impact in a minute, but how big was yesterday's announcement in what he calls the Declaration of Economic Independence?
Yeah, so yesterday's announcement was quite large. We haven't seen tariffs of these sorts and sort of using tariffs as a strategy to raise significant revenue for the U.S. Or really a lot of other countries in approximately a century. So it's kind of a real shift of strategy in that sense, but also extremely impactful just due to the size of the U.S., the size of the trading partners on which we're placing these different tariffs in the particular industries where we're putting them in place. And so it's a really large impact, as we've seen kind of some of the fallout today as people are adjusting to the news and where those tariffs may have different impacts in different areas.
The stock market doesn't particularly like the news. At one point today, it was down 1,500 points, currently down about 1,300 points. That's roughly 3%. Of the Dow Industrial average there. I want to use this word fair. And whether or not, I mean, I'm sure you as a professor, I'm sure we could go an entire semester on this one question. We understand the United States is powerful and we're economically powerful, but as opposed to somebody like Vietnam. So if Vietnam is charging us a 90% tariff, is that fair? These countries that are charging us way more to ship our goods into their country, but we're not charging that when they ship their goods into to the United States. Is that fair?
So I think there's a couple things that you'll see over the coming days. And one is that some of these examples given yesterday in the press conference that we're talking about now with these percentages charged are supposed to incorporate not only the tariff amounts on certain goods or services being coming from those countries, or that we're sending in this case to those countries, but also other non-monetary penalties or quotas or limits on how much you can charge. So different countries have used different ways of protecting different domestic industries. And so for some countries, they may say this industry is very important to us. And so we're either going to limit how much can be brought in from other countries so that our domestic rice producers can, have first crack at selling that rice to our, domestic consumers and even other places around the world. And then maybe after some limit, there's some allowed in, or there's some tariff or other rules. And so those percentages were presented as sort of representing the total amount of trade restrictions or tariffs or other things from these different areas. What we'll likely see is some of them seem quite high compared to what we know in terms of trade agreements and how much there is between countries. But nonetheless, the idea is that the US is at least perceiving from the Trump administration that we're getting a bad deal in that sense, that others are charging more for us to send them our goods than what we're charging for them to send goods into our country. On the whole, it sort of depends. One, we'll see that as we're putting in these tariffs, other countries have announced or are planning to potentially announce that they're also going to put in more reciprocal tariffs and escalate this trade war as we tend to see happening in this sort of way. But two is that essentially what it means is that, yes, those countries, to the extent that they're charging higher tariffs than what the US charges for some goods crossing borders, are essentially paying more to receive those products, those US products, into their country, whereas the US has somewhat taken advantage of the ability to be able to buy low-cost products from around the world without paying significant tariffs on top of it. And so while our producers have seen some, disadvantages in terms of costs of shipping their goods to other countries, our consumers have really benefited from having low tariffs in place on goods coming into the US and being able to buy those jackets, clothing, food, bananas, whatever's coming in at reasonably low cost without that extra levy attached.
So are you saying that those numbers, and we've seen this in the past, whether they're inflated by the Trump administration, that maybe that's not a perfect apples to apples kind of comparison?
Yeah, the numbers seem to be potentially inflated in certain ways, but also presented as sort of this is the tariff that is paid when U.S. goods are sent into that country, but are explained more as, well, this encapsulates all of the restrictions or other things you may face when trying to export something. I know with Europe, it's supposed to incorporate a lot of the value-added taxes and things, as they just tax things in a slightly different manner than we do, by taxing improvements along the way rather than taxing all at once into the final good. And so it's a little bit more complicated than kind of how it is presented with a very high number of a tariff for some of these countries. But nonetheless, that's sort of the idea or the strategy behind this.
And we use the word trade war a lot, and we've heard that a lot in the last month or two. Ultimately, who wins, who loses? Is it the consumers that lose? Is it you and I that lose trying to go shopping for clothes or food? Who ultimately loses in a trade war?
Yeah, so in economics, we like to measure sort of overall surplus or overall welfare, because when we have things like tariffs put in place, it creates some artificially kind of winners and some losers, but overall we tend to lose more than we win when we reduce the ability to take advantage of comparative advantage and produce, bananas in a warm climate that's conducive to it, instead of, say, Ohio, where we could produce a lot of bananas, but it would take lots of extra costs of building greenhouses and heating them through our cold winters, those sorts of things. And so what we eventually see is, with these extra tariffs, which are essentially taxes in place, products cost more, we trade less, we get fewer gains from trade, while some domestic producers may benefit depending on how much they don't rely on importing their inputs to whatever they're producing as well. Consumers are likely to bear the brunt of this in terms of higher prices. When we've already seen inflation finally coming down, we may see more of that. And that's sort of how it works out, especially with just the tariffs that were already announced. If we have reciprocal tariffs from other nations, as are being announced as well, those then start to disadvantage our producers as well, with fewer places to sell their products around the globe.
Kind of makes sense, but let's break this down even further for just the general layperson so that we can understand this. When will we see an impact and what will be impacted?
Yeah, so it depends on the product. We'll likely see it in things like foods relatively quickly because they don't last a long period of time. Oftentimes they're advantageous to grow in, another country much cheaper, like I mentioned with something like bananas or avocados, etc. And we may even see that before those avocados that start paying the tariff even start arriving, we'll realize that it's going to be more expensive for those avocados in a week or two, and therefore grocery stores might want to raise the price of avocados today to say, well, if people are going to be paying this next week, we'll start to inch that up. So we might see those prices start to creep up sooner in those sort of areas. Same thing with automobiles. So typically automobiles might sit on a lot for 1 to 2 months, but we saw a lot of people rushing in to go and bid up the prices of those existing new cars before any of these changes may have gone into place. And so we may see pretty quick changes in a lot of those prices as markets adjust and we try to allocate these more scarce vehicles to buyers domestically.
Will this level out? And we'll get to whether or not this is a strategic ploy in a minute, but does this generally level out, or does the average American Clevelander, do we have to start figuring out how we're going to start paying more for avocados, bananas, stuff that comes in from the outside?
Yeah, so there have been pretty conflicting messages on this coming out. Some still arguing that these tariffs are going to be in place for a long period of time. They're a new strategy for how we're going to conduct things economically and how we're going to raise revenue, and that eventually maybe we can cut some other taxes and use tariffs instead to fund the government as we did, 100+ years ago. And others arguing that no, this is just a negotiating tactic to bring everybody in the world to the table and try to negotiate more fair deals. Those are sort of at opposite ends, so we don't know sort of the duration of this. There's still a lot of uncertainty around it, or how it may work, or if we might get differential impacts in different countries with different industries. And so that's created a lot of this uncertainty, which we're seeing in everything from reactions in the stock market to people having difficulty making decisions over whether or not to go buy some new product, to businesses saying, well, I'm not sure if I should hire someone or not, if I think that I'm going to get a bunch of extra domestic customers because we're no longer exporting as much to other countries who put tariffs on us. Maybe we'll find a lot more people in the US willing to pay more for my products, but I don't want to hire on a bunch of people and expand my plant if these tariffs are all going to go away next month. So I think we'll see a little bit of paralysis in the time being, a lot of trying to negotiate on the international stage, and where we end up kind of depends on what that strategy is and how that all shakes out.
Our final question for Professor John Ernest with Case Western Reserve University, the Weatherhead School of Management. He's in the economics department. I think I know your answer to this, so I have to be careful how to ask this question, but I think you're going to advise people not to hit the panic button, or surprise me and come right out and say that we should all be hitting the panic button.
No, I think your intuition is correct that I would typically not urge people to panic. You tend to not make the most well-informed, wonderful decisions when you're panicking. But I think that taking a look at your budget is always a wonderful thing to do. Taking a look at making sure that you're taking all this new information into account and saying, hey, if I'm going to go car shopping, maybe I shouldn't run out and buy 6 cars before, they potentially go up in price. That probably wouldn't be good for anyone's budget. But maybe I want to keep in mind that we may see prices of domestic vehicles and domestic car companies also increase. And so I want to continue to shop around and not just rule out whole segments of a market because those goods happen to be imported, but kind of make my decision on going forward based on that new information and new strategy. And hopefully things work out reasonably well for you, and you're just making even more well-informed, better decisions.
Turbulent times, to say the least. Professor, thank you for the time, the knowledge, and the advice to not hit that panic button, maybe at least just not yet. Professor, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right, take care. That's going to wrap it up. We know people, you at home, you watching this, have had questions about what all of this means. Just means uncertainty is what we're seeing a lot of, and you're seeing a reaction of that in the stock market today. Now 1,300 points down. Again, sitting right at about that 3% mark. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be here on our digital platforms. Watch for 3.5 hours of first alert weather and news coming up at 3 o'clock on Channel 19. Until then, I'm Dan DeRosa with 19 News. Have a great day.
19 News is everywhere.